been to Casa Loma? Heard of Casa Loma? That's probably the most famous feature that people relate to. They have a little sign there. I have relatives in Ireland that said, oh, I know the Lake Iroquois shoreline because they went to Casa Loma. And it was like propped on the top of the shoreline bluff. This is near Greenwood. I'm not sure if you know where Greenwood is, north of Pickering. Okay, so I've given this talk at a couple of provincial parks, and I think, how do I make rocks and water interesting for kids? So I had to throw in a couple of things to kind of make it interesting for kids, and I kept that in there for you guys. So bear with me. It'll be like Where's Waldo. These guys will pop up every once in a while in this show. So we're talking about sort of history and natural history of Lake Iroquois. And whenever I go like this, you click it yourself. How about that?
Let's try it up here. See if that'll work.
All right, there we go. All right, yes, so Nature Conservancy, there's my little plug. I've been around since 1962, help protect land across the country, and I know some folks in the audience here have helped us do that, so thank you for that. We also get grants from the federal government and other governments to do our work when we match these grants. So really, all of you have helped us do the work we do on behalf of all Canadians, so thank you for your help. We have places where we target our work. We focus a lot of our work. That's all those dots across the country. The Rice Lake Plains is one of our projects, one of my projects, and I'm quite active here with a number of the groups, some in the audience here. But we also do a lot of background science and other landscapes where we're not necessarily doing work, but we want to learn more about the conservation needs of that area. And that's how I got interested in this Lake Iroquois Plain. This is I'm going to talk about this map a little bit later on. But basically, we were assessing conservation priorities in southern Ontario based on physiographic regions, based on landforms and landscapes. And this one, dark color here, is the Lake Iroquois Plain. This is the Napanee Plain. This one ranked on top in terms of rare species, rare habitat communities, migratory bird habitat, fisheries, wetlands, species at risk. But we weren't doing much work down there at the time. We're working up on the Oak Ridges Moraine, for example. Our first project was actually on Rattray Marsh, which was down in the Lake Iroquois Plain. But as we found this out, I started to explore a little bit more, and I realized really I hadn't seen anybody put a story together about that landscape to help people realize what is it that is special about this landform. So that's what this presentation is going to be about. What was Lake Iroquois? We're going to know a little bit more about that already. What is the Lake Iroquois Plain? Where can you find its remains? And what's the legacy that's on the land now that we can find to this very day? Now, I'm a bit of a physiography geek, and I travel around in my car with this book called Physiography of Southern Ontario. And if you haven't got one, it's a classic. It talks about the immutable kind of landforms that are on the landscape that you can experience this very day. And it shows various landform types. This is the Oak Ridges Moraine, for example, in brown. The landform we're interested in is bounded by this line, red line, which is a shoreline bluff from Lake Iroquois. So Lake Iroquois is around for about 500 years, acting just like the Lake Ontario right now, creating shore features, just inland, where it is inland right now. This would be lake bed. So when the lake drained away and left behind lake bed, this is clay plain, this is sand plain, this is beach, basically beach on the old Lake Iroquois shoreline, and also the Lake Ontario shore, which is part of that same landform. So we can see these features on the land, and yeah, with the maps you can actually travel around and find out where they are. So just a reminder, this is back in the glacial time. This is 13,000 years ago. The glaciers were retreating and actually had blocked off the drainage, so it didn't drain out to the St. Lawrence. Actually drains to the south to what is now the Mohawk River system, down the Hudson into the east coast. So this is a stormy time, a cold time, very wave-washed shores, waves crashing and so on. It also was a living landscape. It was a place where there were birds and there were fish. There were Pleistocene mammals, muskox, mastodons, walrus, caribou. So this is a living landscape, but one that was very different. It was more of a boreal kind of landscape. And the remnants of all these creatures in various places throughout the Lake Iroquois shoreline. The lake was so big that it actually would have flooded out almost all of Toronto. And I was going to put a Rob Ford in there and sort of have an ark. He didn't make it on the ark, but no, I decided not to do that. So it was really had flooded large areas of what is now one of the most populated places in all of North America. But the shoreline features actually go quite a bit inland in some areas. And this is actually up north of, in the Seton Lands, north of Pickering. Everybody know that area here. The shoreline would have been quite higher up near that bluff. And again, remember, water was draining out, or it was blocked here and draining out this direction. It was there for about 500 years, and then eventually drained away. And I'll tell the story about how that drained at some point. When it drained away, it left behind what was old lake bed right along the shore here, right on the U.S. side and here. I won't be talking about the area to the north, that's the Napanee Plain, which is a different landscape altogether, but it also was inundated by the lake. And you can, even without this physiography of Southern Ontario, go and find these features and landforms on the landscape. So if you look carefully, you might be able to see what is a linear feature there. And that's the old Lake Iroquois shoreline. That's up, again, north near Greenwood. Actually, we're not far from the 407 is being expanded into. There it is again. So there are places where it's still quite visible. The shore bluff, again, there would have been waves crashing here, and seagulls flying, birds feeding on the shoreline, shorebirds, that kind of thing. Back when that was a big lagoon. Now closer to home, here's Coburg, and there's the shoreline. And most people know it very well by that bluff that follows the 401. Now it's actually the reverse. Many roads, highways, railways, pathways follow that ancient shoreline because of flat beach sand, easy to put these road beds on and so on. So early maps, you see the roads almost always following that old shoreline. Let's go back. This is the Baltimore area up here, and Balls Mills. Conservation area where that little blob is. So you take the shoreline out, you sort of see a little bit of the green feature that's left behind still and remnant from that shoreline area. Now, there's a long history of First Nation occupation, management, and habitation of that Lake Iroquois Plain. It's fertile land, well drained, good for crops. So after the glaciers left for thousands of years, First Nations managed that landscape. They weren't passive travelers to that area, it was their home. And you can do entire presentations just on the First Nations' use of that landscape. So I just want to pay homage to their presence there. I won't be talking much about that because such detail involved, but also all along the Lake Iroquois shoreline, if there are any archaeologists or archaeology buffs, they're always known to be places where people occupied, and there's always archaeological features along those ancient shorelines like the Lake Iroquois shoreline. But let's go back to sort of when it was first documented. This is Governor Simcoe, and he's drawing a line straight north to draw to up towards Lake Simcoe that he named after himself to create Yonge Street. And he documented various ridges, including the Oak Ridges Moraine, going forward. But it wasn't until later on, 1834, when the city of Toronto was created, that they were creating the very first railway north, that they hired a surveyor to really look at where to put a railway north. And he came up, this is actually Toronto about that time. Richmond Street is right about here, just about as far as Toronto went. And a little bit later, this is 1870, looking from the Lake Iroquois shoreline, sort of Bathurst Street, southeast, so that's sort of Toronto at the time. So really this landform really hemmed in development at the time, and it would have stalled an engine going up that slope. So he had to find a way around this ridge, and it took him a long time. Eventually he did, but in the meantime he mapped up this parallel ridge which kind of mirrored the shoreline of Lake Ontario back at a time when they were still figuring out the fact that glaciers did have these effects on the landscape. And they were writing papers about these new discoveries and so on. So this fellow's name was Thomas Roy, or Roy, and he's kind of the unsung hero of Lake Iroquois. He was the first guy who really documented it. Actually wrote a letter to Charles Lyell. If you know him, he was a friend of Charles Darwin, who helped bring his paper to London to the Geological Society, so on. So once he put it on the map, once these scientists read about it, a whole raft of bearded, mustachioed, and flag-bearing guys did some more research on it. Actually, Stanford Planning worked on it as well. And if you were interested, if they had collector's cards, these are what you would want. But what you really would want is A.J. Coleman. Anybody know him? He taught at Victoria College here. back when it was associated with U of T. He was a geologist here, and summers off he would explore geology across North America, but particularly interested in the Lake Iroquois shore. That's him on leading a field trip, mostly men at the time, but there's a couple women here. I'm kind of interested in their stories. That'd be an interesting story in itself. So he's like the captain of the team here. He really put this landform and landscape on the map. So the earlier maps are quite simple. This is his first one in the 1900s. It kind of showed where it formerly flooded, where the old shorelines were, until this beauty that you can get online that shows in great detail the shore bluffs, lagoons, islands, big kind of channels through here. Now there are much more detailed maps since then. For example, you know that we're just in Ganarasa Conservation. They've got quite a detailed map of the actual shoreline. But I do like this one, done at a time when hands did the writing, brains did the thinking, and there weren't many roads or ability to get around was quite challenging. So to do this was quite an achievement. Anyway, so he put this together and gave the first sort of sense, including data from the west side, what that original lake had looked like. And what's left? So there are, as I showed from that physiography map, many features you can see that are really mirrored on the current Lake Ontario shoreline and left behind. Shore bluffs and cliffs, beaches and gravel bars, lagoons, islands, and this is along the 401. You've driven that how many hundreds of times? You've been driving right on the shoreline of Lake Iroquois. Other remnants left behind, sometimes developed, sometimes not. But the Lake Iroquois Plain is what would have been Old Lake then. And here in Northumberland, I think it's a Northumberland shot, sand plain and clay plain became one of the agricultural kind of bread baskets of southern Ontario for quite some time. So those are really important features there, and from a farming perspective, so much of that has been lost. There are places like Northumberland where it has yet to be lost, but it's some of the more fertile land around the lake itself. It's Niagara on the south there, but also the Lake Ontario shore. That's actually part officially of the Lake Iroquois Plain physiographic region. So that shoreline is quite significant, a lot of significant features. I'm going to focus more on the clay plain, sand plain, and the shoreline, not as much on Lake Ontario shore, but that's an important feature as well. That's Bondhead Bluffs. Have you ever been down there? It's a spectacular landscape. Yeah, in itself. So what I want to do is give you a tour of your landscape. And some of you actually, I was talking to somebody, Bruce, I think. You can drive, you circumnavigate the lake and drive along a road that follows that shoreline. And I did that 30 years ago and had no clue it was actually following the shoreline. So what I want to do is take you on a tour right around the lake and help show you some of the features there and some of the landscape left behind. But actually the map there shows a whole array of protected spaces that are protecting this sand barren area. So remember, the lake used to drain out this direction, out into the Mohawk River, then down to Hudson, out to the east coast. So very sandy, and the landscape kind of looks like this. Have you ever been to Pioneer Provincial Park? It's kind of like a flattened Pioneer Provincial Park. Very dry, oak savanna, pine, but lupin, a very rare plant. And there, frosted elephant butterfly, a very rare species. So it's really a significant area that was once old sand deposit carried down from the dry river on its way out to the ocean. Moving to the west, this is the Google map image showing this line here from the back there. We probably can see this line of green. These are wetlands that are fed by springs coming out of the base of that Lake Iroquois shoreline. Because the sand and gravel there is exposed with, that allows the seepage of cold water to feed wetlands. This feature is basically mirrored on the north side here as well. We'll talk a bit more about that later on. But right along here, this is Ridge Road, if anybody's been on there. That follows that great glacial route, also followed by First Nations. So it's a well-known feature on that side. Now we're heading over to the Niagara River here. And the Roy Terrace, not named after Thomas Roy, too bad. This is where Niagara Falls first started. So I think 13,000 years ago, bigger lake had been created, and Niagara Falls started here, and it took 13,000 years ago to get to the point where it is now with Horseshoe Falls and American Falls. But it started here, dumping its water into Lake Iroquois. That's Rock Monument. That's near where that photo was taken. So really, that was the original Niagara Falls. It started here. I'll send my guy over the falls. Oh. Try again. There you go. So it really was not that deep. So the falls now are probably about 5 times higher than it was originally when it went into Lake Iroquois, because Lake Iroquois is a much higher lake at the time. So I'm going to take you around through the Niagara Peninsula. The Niagara Peninsula probably is where some people know the Lake Iroquois shoreline better than many others, and in particular the vintners there. This is from the V2A website, and they're showing this feature here and these benches. Now, any of you ever heard about this bench or that bench if you're into Niagara wines? Those benches are all created by the Lake Iroquois shoreline. So below is Lake Iroquois Plain. Here's the shoreline, and the benches are all up above. So you've got various top bench, 30 bench, hidden bench, many benches. And there's a fellow who works at Brock University, a professor there, I've forgotten his name, but he's a geologist. He's a wine geologist. That's all he does. He's figure out the degree days, microclimate, soils that are subtly different from the top of the bench, the shoreline, to the Lake Iroquois Plain. A 20 degree days difference between some of these different locations that affect the terroir. Any wine people here? Terroir? I don't know what that means, but it affects the terroir. So it really affects the grape because they respond subtly to different microclimate, soil moisture, etc. But they go to their website and they all talk about Lake Iroquois shoreline, and it has a big impact on the business. And here's the shoreline itself, right in Niagara. Niagara Peninsula is really very heavily converted to agriculture or developed, except for the Niagara Escarpment, where the Bruce Trail goes, and this Lake Iroquois shoreline. Actually follow a little highway along here, a nice little chunk of nature in the middle of Niagara. There are these great creek and river valleys as well, and fairly small creeks, but with big valleys, kind of like Wesleyville. And I have a theory about that. So imagine this is after Lake Iroquois drained. The shoreline would have been way up above. Lake Iroquois drained down here, exposing these clay plains or sand plains, and little creeks and rivulets would have carved through that unconsolidated material, creating these big, steep gorges. And I think that's what happened to Wesley. Doesn't it look like Wesleyville to you? This is a beaver dam near Uxbridge, basically. But it kind of shows the same principle. So a quick, rapid drainage of the lake, exposed sediment that could be easily eroded to create these great valleys like Wesleyville. So the same thing happened over on the Niagara side as well. So going around the lake here, the great bar of Lake Iroquois. Highway 403 goes across, so that would have been, again, a big sandbar, a picture of Sandbanks Provincial Park, big sandbar, again, birds, fish, mammoths walking across there and so on. And it created a big lagoon, much larger than this. This is what Coutts Paradise is now. Actually, really the National Historic Site. Current Coutts Paradise is a really small area of lagoon compared to what it used to be back 13,000 years ago. And this is looking at it from the east. So going around to the north there, to the Oakville area, where Iroquois Shore Road still exists, Iroquois Ridge, where you get a good deal at the till. That's a glacial joke. But there are places where they're still kind of recognizing it from time to time. This is where the 403 and Ford Boulevard areas along the QEW, if you know that area, quite built up, but there's still some remnant features in the top right there. That's actually Lake Iroquois, or Iroquois Shoreline Woods, protected by the city of Oakville. And remember, dry sand and gravel habitat supports, things like we have up here in Northumberland. Oak habitat, oak savanna, sassafras, that sort of thing. So there are pockets of protected spaces that still keep that shoreline intact. But as you get north of the lake, much more heavily developed, sometimes built right into the side of the shoreline, but little pocket parks as well. And increasingly, places that have been green have become green spaces, and they're linking them together through trails and so on that we've seen done recently with the Greenbelt trails of various sorts. So we've rounded the lake. Now we're going to visit Toronto for a little bit. There you go. And some of these big features here. where High Park is, and they have oak savanna landscapes there. They actually have prescribed burns in High Park. And you probably hear of some of the prescribed burns we do here in Northumberland. They actually do them there and have really great prairie savanna habitats right in High Park because of the dry, sandy habitats left behind by the lake. Davenport Road, again, a flat area that would have been used by First Nations, so they're calling it actually Toronto's first road because it was an Aboriginal portage or trail between the Humber and Don River system. And that's right along here. Here's the old shoreline with these big bars making it down to Scarborough here. And this, I put this picture up just to show you how it said that the features that were there 13,000 years ago are basically the same that are being created by Lake Ontario right now. This is McLaughlin Bay, Darlington Park. Notice how the sandbar has been created, sediments carried by the currents, creating this bar behind which the lagoon develops. Basically the same features created, but now left high and dry up here west. Now that area, like thousands of people live there. They're up and down the hills and so on. There's staircases all over the place. In fact, there's a James Walk, and if you've ever heard of the James Walk, and all they do is go up and down these staircases. We'll talk about Lake Iroquois. Pretty cool. That's called the Ballman Steps. We did quite a few movies, actually. Then, of course, Castelloma, talked about that. Probably the most famous Lake Iroquois location for many people. Would have been shoreline habitat 13,000 years ago. These are mammoths racing here. I saw it on YouTube. It's got to be true, right? So, and moving further to the east at Scarborough Bluffs. This is actually a watercolor by Coleman. Coleman's a local, you guys should get to know Coleman, interesting chap. But this is where the shoreline would have been. And it's the last place where you, from the shoreline, you can throw a rock into the water. Because the shoreline's now so far away from water. That's the only place where it's left behind much higher, so the lake would have been that high. But it actually is right into what the current Lake Ontario is. So, as I mentioned, sand and gravel deposits are quite common along the shoreline as they are on Lake Ontario now, and they became a kind of a source of sand and easily obtained sand and gravel back around the turn of the century and so on. So really it was like the Oak Ridges Moraine of its time, because all the development was below that, easy to get at these things. Nick Isles from U of T is a geologist there. He wrote Rock Ontario, some of these other really cool books about geology. He mapped basically shoreline by mapping old gravel pits, and all those little dots there are gravel pits, right, or sand pits. And so they would just drive up these little country lanes, dig their sand out for gravel and take it away. These dots are actually where they turn the gravel pits into landfills. So you can still see shoreline based on those little features. This is going back to the turn of the century. This is a horse team here. Picture Clydesdales, big wagon. They just back it up here, dig the stuff out and fall right into the wagon. So that later on, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on. But like I say, it was sort of, in its day, sort of the source of sand and gravel for the development of areas to the south. Many people have seen, well, some people have seen me give presentations, and to have a presentation with only one wildlife slide in it is like astonishing. So this is my one wildlife slide. Bank swallows do live in these exposed banks along the Lake Iroquois shore. Many of them actually live in sand and gravel pits exposed by excavations, but some of the few natural habitats where they live are along these exposed banks of Lake Iroquois shore. And they're rare species, now species at risk, so those features are really quite important to them now. Sweet. So you see these actually along the Lake Ontario shoreline, in some places, but also back from the Lake Iroquois shoreline. Getting closer to home, these are areas where you have a rural area above the shoreline, urban below, and it's really, as I mentioned, the sand and gravel deposits are places where there's recharge of groundwater into some of these deposits, but especially discharge into the streams and so on. So people benefit from the groundwater for wells, but what often happens is the discharge feeds wetlands, which are really important, but also feeds streams. So if you have a stream coming in from above, it might be a warm water stream, hits the Lake Iroquois shoreline, goes through those sand deposits, gets fed cold water from the springs, and gets refreshed, and then all of a sudden becomes a cold water habitat for brook trout, red-sided dace, which is an endangered species, etc. So there's a technical term for it. I call it stream refreshment, but I think it's mid-reach thermal amelioration, that kind of thing. But it gets refreshed by this cold water in the shoreline. So coming closer to home, Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority, a place called Heber Down. There's a little sort of up here. I cross-country skied down that, not this year. Just say what I could. Stevens Gulch, another shoreline feature that not many people know about, but it's sort of tucked away along the Lake Iroquois shore as well. Around Port Hope, there's actually an archipelago of islands that once were part of the lake. Actually, many more islands in Lake Iroquois than they are now currently in Lake Ontario. So this was an old island here. Oh, he's going to go freestyle now, I think. There you go. And here's sort of a topographic map where we kind of drew in some of those. Here's one of these islands here, for example, pointing out the Balls Mill Conservation Area. There would have been a sort of lagoon. And many of you have driven up that many times. That's the old Lake Iroquois shore. There's a conservation area. I found that in the paper. So this Douglas Baxter, he's actually planting trees on that old exposed shoreline. And thank heavens that mill is still there. And I found there's a great battle to save that mill from being destroyed way back when. So that's and then beautiful Northumberland County. And the opportunities are ripe, and it's up to the local community to decide what they want to do in terms of enhanced protection for farmland, for the shoreline features, etc. But I just want to sort of go through what is remaining here. In this book, they talk about, remember that area near Oakville where the Iroquois Ridge truck and tire shop was? There are thousands of orchards, market gardens, small farms, so on, completely gone now. Not gone from here in beautiful Northumberland County, so I just point that out.
What's that book you had in here?
This is Physiography of Southern Ontario. Okay. It's hard to get, actually, but you can get it through your library, for sure. Right, and the Big Apple. So the Big Apple, I call it the Wawa Goose of the Lake Iroquois shoreline. So how many of you have been there? So the Big Apple didn't used to have eyeballs. They painted eyeballs on it. And it's looking right across the highway at Lake Iroquois shoreline. So there it is, right? So you can climb to a little viewing tower there. So my dream, I haven't talked to the manager there yet. One of these days we'll have a display up, all talking about all this Lake Iroquois shoreline stuff, and right inside the apple. But it's also a reminder that of the agricultural legacy that still is here in Northumberland, that's been lost from so many other places within the Lake Iroquois plain. Brighton Wildlife Area, anybody know that spot? Actually, provincial wildlife areas had kind of a checkered history of various uses and so on, but it is protected. And it's actually an old shoreline feature that's been protected through this provincially managed land. So now we're reaching this big blob here called the Trenton Bay. That would have been a big lagoon as part of the Lake Iroquois. That's this area here. So the lake had backed up way into here. This is all clay. This is actually organic matter. That's part of a Murray Marsh. So a big system of islands and so on, shallow water. And you can go explore that. Go back here a bit. So this would have been an archipelago again of islands. The lake would have been up this high. And this viewing platform is actually at Sager Conservation Area, Lower Trent Conservation. You can go and get a really great perspective on that landscape going there. We've got some nature reserves out there ourselves, a donation by Mary West, right near the West Bend Theater, right across the road from there. We've got another one over here, this area here. This is getting closer to Presqu'île Provincial Park, which is down there. There's the shoreline again. And that's Arnold Bose, a late Mr. Bose, donated a nature reserve to NCC of that one. And this is going over to Picton area, not very long, not so long. Picton's at the lower left of the area. I want to draw your attention up the shore of it to this feature. So Prince Edward County was completely flooded over. That landscape was flooded by the lake, but it was an active lake. And when the glaciers were melting away, ice calves off, they had icebergs floating around. These are actually iceberg scours left in the ground, even to this very day. So it scraped down the land so much that the growth pattern still showed where the glaciers, icebergs, once scraped over that chunk of land.
Can you say a word or two about Lake of the Mountain?
No.
Okay.
Afterwards, I sort of, yeah.
Later.
Later, yeah.
Yeah.
Iroquois. Remember, here's Prince Edward County, Lake on the Mountain, right there. And the lake was draining out here, but blocked off to the north. A place called Covey Hill, eventually the ice pulled away from the land, exposing this open channel. And something happened that there's an Icelandic term for it called Jökulhlaup. Any Icelanders here? Did I pronounce that right? Jökulhlaup, which is glacial outburst flood. So where a glacier would back up against ice, get this great exposure, and it's like draining a bathtub, or it's like, you know those backyard pools, little inflatable pools, and as a kid you would sort of stick your foot on it and make it drain out? No, you ever do that? Of course you did that. Anyways, but that's exactly what happened. Basically drained that lake almost to the dry. In one massive flood. Sent this guy scurrying down the lake. So in a very short period of time, over a couple of years, it drained tremendously to the south down this Hudson River system. And it was a massive outburst. So it was like, it was cleaned out this entire valley. And picture mammoths floating, swirling in the water and so on. And blowing their remains, which they found, out into the sediments in the ocean. In fact, Long Island was once a moraine about the same size as the Oak Ridges Moraine. It blew right through it. So imagine a river blowing through the Oak Ridges Moraine. Like that, you know, that's quite a story. So actually, your Lake Iroquois helped create the island of Long Island. So there you go. Congratulations. So this river came right down here and it blew right through this moraine, and here's New York City here and so on. So lots of story behind that. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute did a lot of research on it. One of the things they found out, anybody see this movie, Day After Tomorrow? It's a ridiculous movie. But premise, interesting, where global warming has caused glacial melt in Greenland and other places, drains into the ocean and stops the Gulf Stream. It also creates an instant freeze. So that's the premise of the story, right? That happened after this lake drained out. So it actually dropped global temperatures because so much water was going into that ocean. Actually, it was considered to be about 1/10 of all fresh water going to all oceans across the planet. And it started this global chill, which is really quite phenomenal. Poor guy.
Bad movie.
Yeah. it was kind of a fun movie. So, I'm taking it as a bit of a tour. I talked about some of the features that are left behind now, how the lake was created, a bit of its story, and now what's happening with Lake Iroquois Plain. This is the 407 expansion, various things that have had various impacts on the shoreline, but also led to some positive things, believe it or not. So as I said, we had done some research to show of all these blobs, which are physiographic regions, which ones have the most significant species and so on. The Lake Iroquois Plain is one of them, and that's been directed to the federal government, and they are directing some more of their resources to that area compared to some others. So for some of us in conservation, there's a program called Habitat Stewardship Program for Species at Risk, and they're actually directing money particularly to that landscape because they know it's chock full of rare species and so on. So there's additional attention that's come to this feature that you all are familiar with. One of the reasons is that migratory bird stopover habitat has become much more, we've learned much more about the importance of these shoreline woodlands, even very small woodlands, to migratory birds. And there's a movie coming out, Messenger, various other books about songbirds and how important these migratory
Messenger's playing here on Sunday, twice.
There you go. So
and the filmmaker's coming.
I hear it. And we're actually running it in Uxbridge next week, I think. And I hear it's really phenomenal. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it is.
So these little scraps, even in woodland along the shoreline, are tremendously important. There's a place called Thixon's Woods, and birders all know Thixon's Woods. And sometimes you think, oh, it's so many birds are there because so many birders go there and see the birds. But really, there have been studies to show right across this lake shore and the New York lake shore, on spring or fall migration, depending on what you're looking at, these small woodlands close to shore in the Lake Iroquois Plain are tremendously important for migratory birds. This is that study, actually, if you're interested in looking into the U.S. side. So Darlington Provincial Park, sometimes people think, I got to go to Algonquin, got to go to Bon Echo or Lake Superior. But Darlington Provincial Park has a really important migratory birds, and also introduced a lot of people to the landform. I gave a talk there about this thing, Lake Iroquois shore. Wetlands are tremendously important. This is that Murray Marsh, which is a massive wetland up in that big lagoon system. And also in this Oshawa area, there's quite a few wetlands that are still remaining, believe it or not, that the Conservation Authority, Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority, is trying to protect. So there's Murray Marsh. We've actually entities help protect a lot of land there. Beautiful wetland in that part of the woods. This is what's left. All these sort of polygons are what's left of the wetland in that Oshawa area, but the Conservation Authority is trying to protect what's left in that area. Those flooded swamps and so on. They have believe it or not, a Lake Iroquois beach securement strategy that's been partly inspired by the 407 expansion, because there have to be offsets for some of the damage that's being done by 407. They're getting money to actually apply to protection of some of those Lake Iroquois beach habitats. This is again a conservation map is showing you these remnant chunks of green which follow that Lake Iroquois shoreline, irregardless of whether it's in Durham or Northumberland. Which brings us to your next step in this evening, is talking about the Greenbelt and how it all, how you may or may not consider Lake Iroquois shoreline and Lake Iroquois Plain in your future discussions about the Greenbelt. So just a refresher, there's the Oak Ridges Moraine, the Niagara Escarpment, the Greenbelt, which magically ends in Dufferin. But this is Lake Iroquois shoreline, and which continues on right through this wonderful county. So I hope you enjoyed that tour. I hope you feel a little bit more at home in your landscape, the Lake Iroquois Plain. And maybe you can have questions afterwards, unless you want to get to your coffee right now.
Okay, are there any, we'll take a couple of questions now for Mark, if there are any.
Yes?
Who named it Lake Iroquois?
Who named it Lake Iroquois? It was this fellow, Gilbert, who was one of those guys in the collector's cart. And he recognized the fact that Iroquois people, so the Huron, Neutrals, were the people that had been encountered by Europeans when they first came. So they had trails along that shoreline, so he actually was paying homage to the First Nations.
Breeding ewes and Shropshire rams. We operate on 250 acres of pasture and 400 acres of cropland in the Northumberland Hills. We lamb our first group in March in the barn for our replacement ewes and the rest on pasture in May. So Albert's about to become a very busy man. Albert received the 2015 Maple Seed Pasture Award for Best Pasture Management from the Ontario Sheep Marketing Board and the Ontario Quarry Trails. He and his family are members of the Trillium Lamb Cooperative, supplying lamb to the Newmarket meat packers, the Longo's chain, and the Canadian Lamb Producers Cooperative. Albert's also on the steering committee of the Large Flock Operators of Ontario and the Predation Committee for the Ontario Sheep Marketing Board. Take it away, Albert.
Thank you. Albert's a shepherd. I'm a shepherd. I was asked to talk just a little bit about agriculture in the area, and that affects all of us and affects our livelihood. And basically just want to give you a quick overview of what we do, why it's important for us to protect the land around us and to stop the land disappearing. We have our premier that's challenged everybody to grow agriculture by 20% by the year 2020. And I don't know how that's going to be possible if we're losing land faster than what we are gaining land. They're not making anymore, so for us it's a real challenge. So basically this is just a quick overview. That's my family. My kids are about to go off to Guelph University, so it'll just be me and the dogs running the farm. Our farm is situated in Northumberland Hills, right on the escarpment, I think. Looking at the maps of what you can say, as you can see, we're totally dependent on the land. We run over 250 acres of pasture. The beauty for us is we can run pasture where traditionally they can't crop it because we can't get in there with tractors and stuff, so all the hills is very advantageous for us. Sheep loves the hills. There's just some of our flock, these are all Dorset Bordeaux. We use the terminal sires, and we use our Shropshires for our replacement. These are purebred Shropshire sheep, which is on the extinct list. This just gives you an idea of some of our pastures. They're all very hilly, rolling land. And it's all right there in Northumberland County. It's literally just north of the 401. Our neighbors is St. Anne's Spa, so our sheep can go to the spa if they want. Our dog certainly goes there all the time. This is more of our pastures. Our dogs guarding them. As you can see, lots of rolling hills. We lamb in the barn, as I say. This is one of our barns. We just started actually lambing now already. We have just over 400 lambs in the barn. Now we usually start in March, but this year we started a bit earlier. By May we lamb our majority of our flock lambs on pasture in May, so they'll all be out there on the pasture land. I do stay with them during the May season, lambing season. That's my home, 24 hours a day. Because of predation problems we have massive coyote problems in the area. We lose on average 10% of our lambs to coyotes every year. That's just the nature of the business. So it's a big challenge for us. We have a lot of wetlands in certain areas. We fenced off all our wetlands with a grant through the, with the help of Dutch Unlimited and the Botha Conservancy, helped us with a grant to fence up all of our wetland areas so the sheep can't get in there. Some more of that. We also grow all of our own crops, so we do all of our own corn. We do probably just over 100 and 150 acres of corn. That supply all our feed, and then we have another 200 acres of hayland that we rotate between the corn and our hay down for 5 years, and then we rotate. We also try and keep on cutting the hay because the bubbling species that comes in certain times in June, July, the migratory birds. With some of our hay fields we don't cut for the first cut, we leave it, we'll only cut it in the second cut. And they all get fed on pasture in the fall. We spray, we have a spreader and it chops up the bales and they just get distributed. So they stay outside, as you can see, year round. Other than lambing in the barn, everybody's outside. And this is what it looks like on a day like today. And that's us feeding them. Yeah, we're part of the trillion Canadian land producers. So for us it's very important to protect the land, to protect the area from development, and to keep conserving the land that we have. More and more the farmers are getting pushed out. More and more the farm land is becoming away. Very expensive farmland here at the moment, selling for $10,000 an acre. It becomes very prohibitive for young farmers to get into farming. We've seen what happened out in Western Ontario. Farmland there will go up to $25,000 an acre. Well, they have a bit more productive land than we have, but for us, the price just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and it just becomes impossible for anybody new to come in. To be sustainable as a farm these days, you can't run on 100 acres of farm unless you have a small boutique farm. And I know some of you do and make a living out of it, but for most of the farms, for us to be able to feed and produce what our premier would like us to do, we need a lot of these lands protected for our future and for our future generations to go forward. So that's my speech. Thank you.
speaker is going to be Joyce Chau, and I will introduce Joyce as soon as I can get her presentation up.
May I ask Albert a question while you're doing that?
Okay.
Is it too easy to get residential building permits to build homes on rural acreages?
It has been in the past, yes. It has been quite easy to sever farms off. They have stopped now, especially in, of course, in the Oak Ridges Moraine. That's all stopped, but further south, it's more difficult to get a development in a municipality developed than what it is to get a severance in some of. I mean, we personally have been involved in the development in Grafton for 15 years now. And it's one of the only last designated development areas in Grafton. And we've just been going through absolute hell to try and get it developed. So the restrictions is almost backwards. It's to make it easier to develop in the denser area and leave the farmland alone.
Yeah.
Now, does, with the Greenbelt designation, then make that severing of property off a farm property more difficult, or does the Greenbelt designation not actually affect that?
I'm not 100% sure. We should ask whoever. I know the Oak Ridges Moraine definitely has affected it, that you can't sever it, and I think the Greenbelt will do the same.
The Greenbelt was passed to protect the environment and agriculture, and as a tool to contain urban sprawl.
Yeah.
But at the present time, can a farmer not only get one lot and it has to be a family member? Can you not, and I thought that had been stopped about 5 years ago. At one time, you could get one lot taken off of it. Has that changed?
Depends on the municipality that you're in. Each municipality has got a different.
I know 20 years ago it was, that's why we've got the roads, lines, and farms behind it, but that seemed to cease about 20, 25 years ago maybe.
No, that's not anything. Certain
Municipality,
municipalities
we can still do that.
severance is going on.
It was something like 2 acres every 50 years or something like that?
Yeah.
It was a generational thing?
Yeah, it was a generational thing at that time. I just saw this.
Yeah, I think Peterborough County still has that, every 50 years, they can sever 2 acres for residential.
Well, I can get started before the presentation loads up. My name is Joyce Chau. I'm with EcoSpark, and we are one of 4 environmental organizations working together, calling ourselves the Oak Ridges Moraine Partnership for 2015. So the other 3 groups include STORM, Save the Oak Ridges Moraine Coalition, Ontario Nature, Earth Roots, and myself from EcoSpark. Our partnership banded together in 2013, recognizing that this review of the Greenbelt Plan and the Growth Plan provides a very specific opportunity to protect the Oak Ridges Moraine. And prior to that, all of our groups had a stake in the Oak Ridges Moraine, with our involvement going back into the actual passing of the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan and some of the grassroots movement that led to that forming. So our focus has really been, and our focus and expertise has been on the Oak Ridges Moraine. And so in this part of the Oak Ridges Moraine, as Bruce mentioned in the beginning, it's really significant because the moraine as a whole is an important water-based feature. 65 major river systems flow both north and south, starting onto the moraine. And the actual boundaries of the moraine outline the physiographic elevation of the landscape, but really its function as an important rainbow of southern Ontario extends well beyond it. So water's flowing from the moraine into Lake Ontario, into Lake Simcoe, into Scugog, into Rice Lake. So what we really want to do is make sure that the importance of the moraine as a hydrological feature gets protected. And right now the boundary of the moraine sort of encloses its protection with the moraine policies, but the waters flowing outside of that are not protected. There's no buffering of the moraine with the Greenbelt as we saw in some of the previous maps. So that's really our main concern, because the Moraine is all about water. In Northumberland, the Oakridges Moraine has some of the best natural core and linkage areas of the Moraine, which is a concentration of all those special features, and there's nothing around it to protect it. So with this whole Growing the Greenbelt campaign, what we're proposing to do is add that buffering supportive protection around the Oakridges Moraine using the Greenbelt. And this Growing the Greenbelt campaign goes beyond Northumberland. This campaign is happening in communities across the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So for example, in Simcoe County, groups there are asking for the entire county to be included within the Greenbelt. Groups in Waterloo and Wellington are also asking for their moraines also to be included. And so this is really what we're calling a blue belt approach to the Greenbelt, proposing to grow the Greenbelt using water as a key criteria, because it's such an important linking aspect, no matter whether you're an environmentalist, you're in agriculture, water connects us all. So these are the reasons why we love the Moraine. I mean, we're very fortunate in Northumberland in that we still have some of these pristine areas that we don't have anymore as you move west. And this is a graph to show what I was saying with the Oakridges Moraine being the rain barrel of southern Ontario. The boundary of the Moraine you see in the lighter green, but it's the start of all of these watersheds and river systems flowing both north and south. So the function of the Moraine goes well beyond the actual protective boundary of the Moraine. And on top of that, there are many threats that are affecting the water quality and water quantity. In this area in particular, there's threats from green infrastructure, permits to take water, there could be threats of fill, and all of these will have an impact on water quality. And with research conducted by the conservation authorities, they're finding that the Greenbelt and the Moraine are maintaining the water quality as it is, which is good, but it's not doing anything to improve it. So it's what we have in place right now is just keeping things at a baseline. So that's not good enough, because we know what things are coming down the road. And even though right now development might not be a major threat in this area, it will be as we move forward. And so this is why we really want to use the Greenbelt as a tool to protect the Oakridges Moraine in Northumberland County. So the Greenbelt was put into place to curb urban sprawl, to protect the environment, and to protect agriculture. And it will offer that buffer in Northumberland County where there's nothing buffering the Oakridges Moraine currently. And so this is the larger Growing the Greenbelt campaign I was talking about. We're calling it Blue Belt. And so there are very strong efforts right now in Simcoe County to grow the Greenbelt there, around the rest of the Lake Simcoe watershed, and in Simcoe County. There are a lot of efforts in Waterloo and Wellington as well. And there are also efforts in this area we call the White Belt, which is sort of the land in between the Moraine and the developed areas, and the need to protect the headwater features there. And then of course there's Northumberland. So growing it through Blue Belt criteria includes important headwater features, other moraines that are significant for recharge and discharge of water, significant features such as wetlands, provincially significant wetlands. And also we wanted to make sure the growth is happening in places where we know there is existing support on the ground. So Northumberland is a key area for growing the Greenbelt. Right now we're in a very special window of time where we're right in the middle of the review of the Greenbelt plan. We're in the second phase of it. So the province is going to be releasing a set of proposed amendments on this review, and that those proposed amendments will be released in about April, after which there will be a window of time for the public to make comments to those proposed amendments. So what we're encouraging groups to do is that if you want the Greenbelt to be grown in your area because you think the water is important and needs to be protected, the time to act is now. You can't wait until the proposed amendments come out, because once those come out, there's not much room for change afterwards. So there's a small window of time right now where groups can demonstrate that they care about the water in their area, that they want to grow the Greenbelt to protect these significant and vulnerable water features. And groups like Sustainable Coburg are championing this in their area, but the more groups that are saying the same message about the importance of water, the importance of growing the Greenbelt, need to be heard. And ways to do that is to get involved in the campaign, join Sustainable Coburg, sign the pledge and petition, and to see in your neighborhoods if there is appetite to be a part of this campaign in Northumberland County, but also to be a part of a larger campaign for the Greater Golden Horseshoe to protect our water resources. Thanks.
Okay, so Ken, if you could bring up the lights.
I can bring up the lights.
Tell the projector.
I can do that. Set up your tables.
We're going to set up a table. We're going to have Joyce and Albert, and Mark, maybe you could join us on the stage. And just answer questions that you might have.
Thought I was off the hook.
I can start off by answering one of the questions I had for you. The current groups that we've been in touch with, in addition to Sustainable Coburg, have been the Little Beach Field Naturalists and the Northumberland Land Trust. So right now we're in a I really enjoy this phase of this campaign because we're gathering interest, creating synergies, and seeing how we can move forward. So the key is to have the key is power in numbers. So more groups that can be involved in this campaign, the better, because the proposed growth includes a very significant area. And in total, the total ask of growing the Greenbelt across the Greater Golden Horseshoe is 1.5 million acres. So this is not a small ask. It's an opportunity for us to be bold. We know that there is political will from the government to grow the Greenbelt, and they need to be told how and where. And so this is that opportunity.
Do you have any questions? No, I have a couple that were.
I have one.
Here.
Were submitted earlier. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering why there's no interest in the Peterborough area, or if there is.
There may be. It's just with the map there. That's where we have confirmed interest from groups to grow the Greenbelt.
Okay.
So we're not saying that the current map is limited. We just haven't been to those areas to grow it. And so in Simcoe, for example, when we had the first iteration of the map and only covered a piece of it, when we met with groups in Simcoe County, they said this is not enough. We need the entire county. So the answer is it could be, but it's a matter of making that connection to see whether the appetite is there from the groups.
Yeah. Okay, because I was just reading earlier today about, and I know the development pressure isn't the same here as Toronto, but what happened with Barrie as the Greenbelt was formed, there was a perceived lack of land for development, and so it sort of did the leapfrog up to Barrie, and then you suddenly have sprawl because there's highways going there. So I would say there's a concern for the Peterborough area with the 407 that's being extended there. It just seems like we might end up siphoning a lot of that up there. So it's just a concern.
Okay.
I live on Presqu'île Point, which is, my postal code is Brighton. I previously lived in Brighton. And while Brighton's in Northumberland County, technically, its economic orientation is to the counties next door, Prince Edward County and the county that encloses Belleville. And most Brightonites work in Trenton and Belleville, and they shop there. And I think psychologically their orientation is to that region. And I worked with a small group of people to try and stop a Canada cement gravel pit being built in just outside of a little hamlet called Codrington, north of Brighton, a few years ago. And our town council had no interest in our petition whatsoever. We had over 1,000 petitioners, which is a lot in that little community. And we had several meetings in our community center, and our mayor sat and listened to our questions and made bald-faced lies, and just raised so much ire of the citizenry there. I thought my head would blow up. I was so angry. And I wonder what you do with a part of the county that's significant in terms of the geography, because that catches the whole easterly point of the moraine, but the political leaders there are not on your agenda at all. The mayor is a developer, and all of his buddies are developers.
With this review is a provincial review, and so the primary audience would be the provincial decision makers.
Yeah.
So for Northumberland County it would be Lou Rinaldi, and he's Liberal.
Yeah.
He's pro-Greenbelt and growing the Greenbelt, so I think that's a major plus in this area. That's not to say that you should ignore the lower tier municipal level, because they should definitely be informed and involved. And I know with the promotion of this event, they've been well informed and involved, and it would be involving them as part of the conversation.
10% of Northumberland's population is in that Brighton jurisdiction. I think somehow we have to embrace them in this initiative.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the whole divide in the county. How there's the eastern side of it and the western side of it. So.
Yeah, there's unfortunately, Kimberly Leadbeater, who was supposed to be here tonight representing the district health unit, she is actually lives and works in Brighton. Would have been a good person to bring that up later.
It is safe to say, though, that without municipal support and strong local support, it'd be hard to make these expansions happen.
Yeah.
So that might be a challenge for that area.
Yeah.
But there's a large number of other kind of communities where there might be enough grassroots support. There's the technical reasons to protect the Greenbelt.
Yeah.
There's farmland reasons to protect the Greenbelt. But if you don't have the sort of grassroots support to back it, it'll be harder for the government to justify to those who don't want to expand it to do that, right?
And I've heard you talk about settlement areas, and Brighton is a settlement area. And when you look at a map, Brighton looks like a little blob down near the lake, but its municipal jurisdiction extends up to Codrington, which is a couple of minutes south of Warkworth.
Yeah, that wouldn't be its settlement area, but I'm sure it's defined more narrowly than that. I mean, we can look at the map. I think we had a question here, Jim.
I was just curious, I know Albert here talking from an agricultural point of view, but there doesn't seem to be any farmers in the group, and a lot of their land is concerned. Wondered about the Northumberland crop and...
Well, actually, Elena and Gregory are here from Wicklow Way Farm, so
yes,
you have some farmers.
Okay, but, you know, a lot of the land mass that you're speaking about is agriculture.
Oh, yeah.
I was just
Absolutely.
curious to why the agricultural community is not represented here, other than like 2 people out of all the acres that we're talking about.
Right.
It's not very much.
We
I
have
think
about
it's
3 weeks to organize this event.
yeah, I think it's a communication. It's not people not knowing about it. Right? A lot of the farmers that I've spoken to never even heard of it. Never even heard that the Greenbelt's trying to expand in there. So I think there's a lack of communication.
But it is going to affect their land. And, you know, I got an Alaska letter on my email. I get one once a week. And the Northumberland crop put one out. But I haven't seen it mentioned.
What's the time frame of the initiative you're trying to conduct here? Is there a tight timeline?
It would be before the proposed amendments are released by the province, which we're expecting in late April.
Yeah.
It's a month and a half.
Is it possible to take a type version of this evening on the road to Warkworth, Campbellford, Hastings, some of those places, or all of them? Because
Definitely.
I think lots of us know people who could make meetings happen in those communities.
That's where we would need.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, admittedly, a sustainable covert, we don't have any kind of deep roots into the farming community. So.
Yeah.
I think it's important to get it to the, I mean, we have the Northumberland Federation of Agriculture, which all the farmers are members of, the OFA.
Yeah.
Just take it to Al Carruthers, who's the president, and he can, with one email, spread the word to every farm in this its position right. Got to be careful too that there's a perception, right, that okay, if we put the Greenbelt on, we're not going to be able to do anything.
Right.
So that is the biggest problem and the biggest hurdle you're going to have with a old farm. And I'm not saying that, I'm saying a lot of the traditional old farms don't perceive it as a positive. You know, they don't want the Oak Ridges Moraine forced upon them, or they don't want this forced upon them.
Because that blunts their exit plan, doesn't it? I mean, if I'm an aging farmer and I don't have a succession plan in my family,
That's right.
then my exit plan has to be to sever and sell my land for housing, right?
Yeah,
And
Isn't
if,
that easy, Ken? You can't just do
but
that.
that's not that easy
That,
anymore.
it's A1
And
agriculture.
the price of farm land has become so valuable that you better off sell the farm right now because there's such a demand for farmland. I mean, most farms that's traded hands in our immediate areas never made it to a realtor. They all have 4 guys lining up and bidding for the farm before the farmer even thinks about retiring.
okay.
So I don't think that's, but that's got to be made clear in how it's presented, is that this is not a threat. This is not going to take away anything. It's actually going to save and support what we're doing. And I think if it gets worded right and it gets put out right, you'll have massive support for it.
Yeah, I think this evening is really a first step and a first start of the conversation, and the agricultural committee definitely needs to be a part of it. And so with an event like tonight, I'm hoping it will spark that kind of conversation and bring more people to the table. And that has happened in Simcoe County, and that the Simcoe OFA there is part of this Growing the Greenbelt in Simcoe County.
Well, I mean, you're probably talking roughly 80–90% of all the land you're talking about that's going to be part of the Greenland is owned by farmers. So 80% of those people should be in this room to decide, yes, we want to do it. Right? You can't have a small group like this decide, okay, well, we want to go ahead and do it without, because you will have major reform if something gets put through that they never had a voice in or never even knew about.
Well, how about you be the spokesperson for us?
You birth as lambs then.
Yeah.
Hey, got somebody living in a trailer for the next month.
Have a question, Doctor?
Not really a question, but a suggestion. I used to work for the Ministry of Health, and they, of course, get lots of petitions. And I have to tell you that a petition that comes in with 10,000 names is counted as one. And that's how ministries look at the complaints. A letter with 10,000 names is just one letter of complaint, the way they look at it. It's much more effective if they get 15 letters from 3 or 4 citizens than one letter with 10,000 names. So if you are going to make a complaint, I would recommend that you put your pen to paper and don't let somebody else be doing all the work. Do it yourself. I've sat on, I used to be in Toronto, I was chairman for Scout Trees for 15 years, planting trees across Toronto. That's part, I sat on the Parks and Recreation Committee for 6 years in Coburg. I have sat on advisory committees with the Athabasca Conservation. We've got to keep moving ahead and really put it to the politicians, because it's very easy to let money take over common sense and looking after what we value the most.
Thank you.
Can I just comment on that? One thing that hasn't really been said yet, and I'm not part of the kind of coalition that's working really hard to expand the Greenbelt, etc. But there was a big worry that in this review, that the money, the powers that be who didn't want the Greenbelt in the first place would lobby to have it reduced and diminished. And there was a lot of concern, a lot of work was put into it by groups like yourselves to make sure that we didn't step back. So that was the achievement of no change, is a massive achievement. And I think part of that is because the agricultural community was backing, it as well. Like there were tweaks and there were issues, that site-specific things need to be dealt with, and I think they are in the review. But largely, there wasn't a backlash from the farming community, that was also amazing to see.
And I think something that should also be stipulated, and it's very hard, I try to find it myself. What exactly does the Greenbelt, what does it mean to be part of the Greenbelt? List protect farms, or what are the negatives? What does it impose on it? Should be listed and spelled out so everybody knows, well, if we are part of the Greenbelt, this is what you can and can't do. Right? And there's no way where you can find that, even on their website.
Yeah, the details are.
There's no details in it. So that's why the perception of the Greenbelt on the farming community is like, all right, now what rules am I going to, we've got enough rules and regulations to follow as it is. Now what are we going to be stuck with, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, any discussion in the work with King or wherever we were going that was going to be speaking for other departments would have to take.
Yeah, here's a list of the pros and here's a list of the cons, and put it on black and white, and then everybody knows, right? But it's not available.
Well, I think the challenge is that there are so many layers and upon layers and layers of rules and regulations for farming. It sort of becomes difficult in what can you attribute to being the Greenbelt and what are other rules from OMACRA. And I think the Friends of the Greenbelt Foundation did a report looking at what are some of the challenges that farmers face in the Greenbelt and how many of those challenges are actually attributed to the Greenbelt plan. And correct me if I'm wrong, they found that most of the challenges are actually not due to the Greenbelt plan, but it was the perception that it was the Greenbelt plan. So I think it just speaks to the layer upon layers of entanglement of missing policies that need to be clarified and simplified.
But to me, sorry to interrupt, but it would seem to me that the takeaway from this evening and from the presentations is that if you care about Northumberland, if you care about the nature of our water, of our air, of our land, if that is important to you, and you don't want to see the same thing that happened to the west of us, where urban sprawl has taken over and we've got all kinds of environmental issues and we've got transportation issues and we've got health issues. We know what happens when there's no protection. This is going to provide protection, just like the Oak Ridges Moraine is protected, but that's a separate entity. We need to do another layer of buffer, which is the Iroquois Plain, so that if it matters to you what you breathe, what you eat, what you drink, then you will want that protection for your community and for your county. It's as simple as that.
Well, I think it's more complicated.
At one cost, though, is what everybody's going to ask.
We're talking about cost and simplifying things and that. And what, big thing, what does it mean to the farmers? Like, I mean, if we take one little corner of my lot, and in my place, well, I'll lose all my birch trees. And I do birch sap and stuff like that. I lose a chunk of my income right there. So that's how your average farmer probably looks at it. Now, I don't know the complexities of all this and what would it affect me in that way? But the farmer next door, it's about something different. It might be part of his water rights that he needs for his cattle, and so on and so on and so on. We're not talking about businesses that can afford to lose a big chunk. You watch.
But that's the question. What are you going to lose as a farmer?
If Maple Leaf or Conagra or something there lose 10% of their business, well, they're not going out of business. You tell the average farmers they just lost 10% of their income, they're going to be basically filing for bankruptcy a lot.
But why?
Get another job.
So, yeah.
But is this potentially a Toronto Star feature story or something like that?
Toronto Star has covered.
It has, the Blue Belt has been covered by the Toronto Star.
Yeah.
Recently as well? Yeah.
It was covered in November.
It was covered in the GTA section.
Okay. Let's let's get that, let's read it, let's distribute it if it's supportive of what you're trying to do.
The series of Greenbelt articles are on or the Toronto Star articles are on the Greenbelt website. All the information that's been published about the Greenbelt is available there. I mean, I'd suggest that in a future meeting that a farmer from an area that is already designated Greenbelt be invited to answer some of these specific questions. But as you say, each farm is different, and the challenges that they face are unique to their own business, but it probably would be instructive to have somebody who is currently dealing with farming in a Greenbelt area be part of a future meeting.
Okay, I'm going to take Felix first, and then the front, and then the back. Felix?
More of a comment than a question, but to Joyce's point, the Greenbelt Foundation, who I work for, we have done lots of research on agriculture in the Greenbelt. We've done a big study with a Guelph professor who talked to farmers across the region in a series of focus groups. This is the study that Joyce was referring to, just to find out what their experience was with the Greenbelt, the challenges they face, and most of these are related to near urban agriculture, so just issues with being close to urban areas. Other layers of provincial federal regulation and inconsistencies with how different municipalities and conservation authorities interpret the policies. The Greenbelt policies themselves, and the plan is up on the ministry's website if you can read planning language. We're also in the process of creating a kind of a plain English version for anyone else to read and understand what it really means. It restricts your ability to sell a farm for development. Doesn't restrict any other farm uses. Value-added uses, building a barn, things like that, still allowed. But it's really designed to stop the selling of farmland for suburban development.
One short question. I'm confused as to whether what you are hoping to accomplish is to affect the report before it issues, or to get better comment once it issues.
It's to affect the report before it gets issued.
And when did they start writing the report?
The report, a lot of decisions have been decided, but there's some key issues that they haven't been able to land on, and we suspect this is one of those issues because it has a lot of traction and a lot of interest.
Is that inside information that you're in effect? I'm trying to figure out, in my business, if there's a report issuing in April, it's even about the 9th rewrite and all of it locked up. So is this something that's that much in flux that we can still make a difference?
I think there's still time to make a difference on this particular issue. Some other issues have been dealt with long ago, but this is one of those issues that still hasn't been signed and sealed yet.
So the definitive plan, if somebody was sitting here and wanted to help, what would they do?
They would get in touch with Sustainable Co-work, sign the petition, and help to promote growing the Greenbelt in Northumberland County, and add more people to this movement.
Or according to this lady, send a letter on their own.
And send a letter on your own. So there's a template, there's a pledge, but the language, you can take it and modify it and put it in your own words.
And where is that pledge?
Our petition.
The Sustainable.
Our
pledge.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So it's on our Facebook page, and when you go on and click on it, it sends a separate letter. So it's not like a pledge where you've got a list of names. So each time somebody signs that letter, it goes to Lou Rinaldi, and it is also going to the Minister of Natural Resources. So each time so already when it went up a couple of hours ago, there were 20 signatures. 20 people had already been on. So that meant 20 letters had already gone to each of those people. So every time somebody goes on to that pledge form, your individual letter is already sent. There is a spot on that pledge where you can personalize, add your own comments, etc.
Okay, thanks.
To really simplify the objective, is it to include Northumberland where it is not now included? Is it that simple?
Yes.
Yes. Hand up back there.
Yeah, sure. Is the report that you were making reference to on your website?
It's on the Greenbelt Foundation.
The Greenbelt Foundation.
Greenbelt Foundation website.
It's greenbelt.ca.
Greenbelt.ca.
Because I agree with the comments that, it's just, there isn't enough information being presented here about how it's going or may impact the land use.
Absolutely.
Across the county.
I would strongly suggest people do their own research.
I'd like to read that report. I mean, have you touched base with the Northumberland Federation of Agriculture?
No, not.
No.
I have not.
But they're on the.
We don't have all those avenues built. We've only been working on this for a few weeks. And, you know, every time we send out an email, we ask people to make comments, send us names, etc. But that's a slow process.
There are two members of the Northumberland Food Policy Committee who are members of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, and they were made aware of this meeting. I didn't hear back from them. They don't live right in the area, so that may have been partly why they're not here. But I am planning to follow up with them.
So Joyce, a question about sort of timing. So we want to affect the plan before the amendments come out to the Greenbelt plan. Hopefully there'll be some more area included, but is it going to, I don't think, you can correct me, that it will be very prescriptive. Okay, in this block of land, the amendment will say this is what can or cannot go on. Is it going to set up a process where that can be figured out?
Ultimately, when the province does grow the Greenbelt, they're not just going to say this is where it is. There's going to be consultation once they decide where they want to grow it.
Right. Yeah, so that was important. I think that it's not a done deal.
No.
Right? It would set up the processes to get at some of the more detailed information, I think, going forward.
So have you communicated with other municipalities in Northumberland besides Cobra?
No, we've met with the Conservation Authority recently, and the next step is to make those connections and meet with more groups in the agriculture community and with other municipalities.
A roadshow.
Yeah.
In terms of people finding more information, is there more information on the EcoSpark website? Like when we have greenbelt.ca, clearly is a good resource. What else would you suggest?
So for the Growing the Greenbelt, there's information on the EcoSpark website. So the map that I showed about where the proposed growth is growing is up there. It also will link to the criteria that is being proposed in terms of important water features and functions. Our partnership also recently wrote a letter to Minister Tevik Meekin of Municipal Affairs and Housing and Morrow for the Ministry of Natural Resources, telling them to grow the Greenbelt based on this criteria. So a copy of that is also on our website, and I could send it to Sustainable Cover so we can link to it.
Yeah, if we can link to it on our website.
I'm here also representing a small farm, but we have about 200 acres. The owners, myself, and 2 other people are taking care of all of that. We don't have internet on the farm. And I'm also a landowner bordering Rice Lake. I don't have internet there either because I can't get it. So is anyone phone canvassing people or knocking on doors or something other than listing websites and Facebook pages? Because I knew nothing about this.
How did you find out about tonight?
The farm is a member of Sustainable Coburg, so I'm here representing because they have markets that we're busy. We're very, very busy right now. I was weeding all day today, and now I'm here tonight, and they are getting up at 4:30 in the morning to head to markets. But if I wasn't here, they're not necessarily getting at all their emails right now.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's definitely something that we should connect about in terms of moving forward and reaching out to people.
Pretty clear we need to reach out to them.
It was on the radio.
And it should be soon, actually, if we're going to
Yeah.
it should be very soon.
Very soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's not the only one, everybody else was planning on, gearing up. planning,
It's tough when you're not, nobody thinks of people not being able to. Everyone's got cell phones, and, email everywhere now, so that's interesting. So-
Okay, we're past 9:30. I think we're pretty much ready to
Okay, so
wrap
you're in
up.
Hollow there, you don't.
Joyce, did you want to make any closing comments?
No, I think,
Okay.
I
Oh, really? Wow.
I want to say again that this is this phase of this campaign, like nothing has been set in stone. This is really a stage of synthesis and bringing people together. So the fact that you came out tonight is amazing, and it's the first, I see this as the very first step in many steps moving forward. So I want to thank everyone for coming out on a night like tonight and being part of this at the very beginning of this growing Greenbelt in Northumberland County.
And spread the word.
Yes. And thank you for the people that traveled to come here on a very uncertain day. Thanks again to Ken for hosting.
Yep.
You're welcome.